Powerful Street Juke back in here again. I explained why it's here in a previous video, but I'll explain it again. The video you can read, or I should say hear more about this, is about the coolant system in the MR engines, which my stuff's still even set up for recording that. So, short of it is, we are having an overheating problem under very specific circumstances. Basically when we're getting off of the highway and come to a stop. Otherwise, it can drive around town forever and it can drive on the highway forever. It's a very specific circumstance, and as explained in the water or coolant video, I should say, it's related to the fact that this is a block that has some block fill in it, some cylinder support, and the factory water pump sucks. So if you want even more explanation of that, go check out the coolant video. So the solution is we need to add a second water pump. Now obviously a belt-driven one, out of the question, so we're going to be adding an electric one. We're going to be adding the Roush style one, so that they use in the Mustangs and some BMWs, to just bump up the coolant flow in the engine to get things circulating a bit. On top of that, we're also going to be having coolant flow through this cooler, just to make sure the coolant that we are pumping doesn't just stay hot in the engine. It adds some auxiliary cooling to it. We are going to be setting it up in the fuel tech, so this pump only comes on when the engine is below certain RPMs and below certain speeds. That way this thing isn't constantly on. We also have some fans that we might be putting on in front of the AC condenser or in front of that, depending on what we have for space. So here's the game plan. The hose we're going to be using to do this is our heater core return line, which is that one there. And we need to find a place to not only mount the pump, which I have that sorted out, it's gonna go underneath this air filter here. We also need somewhere to mount this. Now, we went a little big on this, I will admit, but it's what we got, so we gotta make it work. Now, there is nowhere to mount this at all. If we didn't just move this intercooler piping here, we'd put it in there, but we can't. The new owner of this car, Phil, has said that he's okay if we get rid of this windshield washer reservoir, and we'll figure out a solution to that problem when he needs to. As of right now, he doesn't care. So I'm thinking we're gonna take the reservoir out, and that is gonna get mounted up in that fender, and we will take out that vent cover on the bumper right there so that air can get to it. We're not relying on this to cool the entire car down, so it's not a massive deal if it doesn't get constant airflow to it. It's just a supplemental system. So we will run from the firewall to our pump feed to the auxiliary cooler back to the heater core return, which is right there. As far as powering the fan, if we use it, and the pump, we'll just put it on a relay with a grounded output from the fuel tech to trigger it. And we will actually just put it on the thermo fan trigger system in the fuel tech. And we can also use multiple outputs so that it turns on under different conditions if there's not enough conditions on that one. But that's a whole other thing. So we got to get this out, make sure the hoses aren't going to be in the way, and figure out a means of making mounting brackets for that. I got to see if I have any aluminum that we can use for that. If we don't, I got to get some. I know I have stainless steel, but that might be a bit heavy. Haven't decided yet. We're going to look into that. I would really wish we could mount this here. It's just, it's too wide, and I don't want to wait a couple days to get another cooler, because this one's going to work fine. We will just move that out of the way. Not a big deal. I kind of had to scurry along to get stuff done, but we got the cooler is mounted. These bolts aren't even like fully tight yet, and this thing doesn't move. You can see we have hoses run, and if we follow the hoses, we have the pump, which I got to make a mount for, and wire it in. And then you can't even really see the hoses, one that comes out of the heater core, which feeds into the pump. And then the whole system is working. Let me see if I can phone show at the same time. The reason I definitely know it's pumping is because it's actually bleeding the system, the bubbles coming out. So let me just do this. So we know that it is bleeding, pumping, and working. So now we got to get to the electronics side of this. It's bleeding pretty good. I still got to put 2 clamps on too. So that's exciting. The big test is going to be when I get this thing back running. We have to make sure that we have fluid circulating through here with the pump off. And if it ends up doing that, and we'll be able to tell because this will start to warm up if it's actually flowing the fluid, because it will go through the heater core, come out, go through the pump, and then in here. If that's flowing, then that tells me that, from what I've researched, these pumps allow fluid to pass through when they're not running, which means we will be fine to use this pump only over certain temperatures and under certain speeds, which is what we want. We could run the thing all the time, but then you risk the issue of overcooling the engine, because this is pulling coolant from the engine no matter what, because it's going through the heater core. So you don't want to bypass the radiator system, first of all, because it's going to be sucking it that way. And you also don't want to be cooling down everything while the thermostat's still closed through this radiator. You don't want to overcool. So if we pump the fluid really fast with this pump, we risk overcooling the system. Whereas if we allow everything to flow naturally, which is the hope, to let the car warm up and get to temperature, then we won't have that problem. Nobody's done this on this system before, so we're kind of in uncharted waters, which is just completely normal at this point. So I'm going to, for the time being, leave it the way it is, get the battery back in it, intercooler pipe, fire it up, and see if this heats up. I might also just run that pump for a little while longer and bleed the system, because that is awesome. You know, bleeds the thing without having to sit here and idle it. So it's looking like it's going to work. I am having a little bit of concern about clearance with this, but I put enough wiggle room in the holes where I can rotate this if I need to. And I already checked, the tire does not hit that even when it's on the ground, so that's fine. Worst case scenario, we just bend in these tabs, because like I said, this thing, I could, I'm shaking the whole car, pulling on it. I could lift the car up by that. I welded it to there, the brackets. So those aren't going anywhere. I gotta splash some paint on them though. So, looking like this is gonna work. Let's see what this thing does. Okay, so this tube is coming out of the heater core and it's getting warm. This is coming out of the pump. That's getting warm. That's a good sign. That goes to here. That's warming up. That's good. Yeah, this is already warmed up. Okay, so it flows with the pump off. That's good. We wanted to know that. Now that we know that that's the case, shut this thing off, and we're gonna figure out how we're gonna get the electronics to work, and I gotta make a bracket for it. All right, aside from needing some paint, we got a bracket on there holding that. That's how I usually hold with the aftermarket, just a band clamp on there. I've got a clamp on the hose there. That clamp is tight. So all that's left is the electronics. So what I'm gonna do is we're just gonna ground this to a grid ground spot around here, and then run a power wire inside the car and hook it up to a relay, and then figure out what I'm gonna do for output controls from the fuel tech to turn this thing on and off. I've got my little pull through here. We're gonna pull through some wire to run over to there inside the car. The fuel tech in this car is mounted in the middle, as I'm sure some of you know. I'm gonna mount a relay back there, and the fuel tech is going to turn that relay on and off for the pump. And what I'll do is I'll show you guys setting up the electronic side. The wiring side's kind of boring. Just gonna, run a wire. Grab this, pull this through. Pull this through. Why is it not pulling through? I need 2 hands. So gonna do that, run a wire, and then I'll show you guys how we're setting that up. Okay, so we have our relay all hooked up. We got it power running to it. We've got it going out to the pump. We have the back of the ECU here. So now we got to set it up and then hook up this ground circuit, which will turn the relay on and turn the pump on. So we're going to do that with 2 things, with a progressive nitrous control and a thermostatic fan. Now, progressive nitrous control, we're using it because we can use it for RPM based control. So when this thing is, you know, on the highway, 2600 RPM and above, we don't want that pump on. We don't need that pump on. The mechanical pump is clearly doing just fine. It's when we're off the highway, we want the pump going on. So we have on and we have off, and we can play around with this. So we could also do it by speed, but I'd rather do it by RPM. And it also won't work when we're under certain temperatures. What RPM we want it on and off with. These things cruise 65 miles an hour, you know, up near 3000 RPM. So I think 24 should be fine. And then we also have thermostatic fan, which will turn this on. So when the temperature, if we start getting hot, we get over 180 degrees, which on normal Juke, that is not starting to get hot, but this car is running low temperature thermostat with no water control valve. So it runs at like 160 to 170. So if it starts to heat up, we also want the pump to kick on just in case, say we are on the highway or our RPM is high. So we have that. So now what I have to do is just hook up those pins. So we go here, and then we have thermostatic fan right there. So pin 6 in progressive nitrous, which is pin 5 on connector A. That's that one right there. So we'll just tie those 2 wires into this, put them into the back, and then just run the test output to make sure this relay kicks on and I hear the pump turn on. And then put this thing back together, and then we'll have Phil take this and do a lot of testing in it. But let me get this all hooked up and I'll show you guys it all working. All right, I've got those wires hooked up to the relay. Let's check our outputs. Output. Yeah, that turned the pump on, and that turned the pump on. Excellent. We got the ignition on. The pump is not on right now, which it shouldn't be with the car off because it's set up on nitrous. So the car's obviously not going to fire its nitrous while it's off. So we know that's working. So let's get this all back together.
Like and subscribe, guys.